What's going on, everybody? It's Nick, also known as the Vita Lover, and recently I made a video sort of giving a very emotional response to Sony after the E3 press conference where the Vita really wasn't even talked about at all. And so today I'm sort of coming up with a follow-up video to that, sort of looking at more than just my reaction, looking at sort of the internet's reaction to the E3 press conference and sort of how it didn't really mention the Vita at all. So I really remember after the press conference just being incredibly mad, incredibly disappointed, and just being really, really frustrated. And it almost hurt. It almost hurt knowing that I was being abandoned and sort of cast aside. And so I sort of went to the internet looking, or trying to find what other people were saying as well for the Vita. And I found that it seems like the Vita community has finally woken up. Now, for my Killer V channel, I do have a couple videos pretty much almost a year ago, pretty much saying, look, remote play is not going to help, indies is not going to help. And I would say in large part I was right. And so now it seems like I almost foretold or had the foresight to see this coming. Now people are sort of mad about continuously getting indies and all of this stuff. They're mad about getting ports. They want new big games on the Vita. As I mentioned, it seems like all Vita owners wanted from the E3 press conference was one big game. So what really happened is now a huge group of Vita owners are just taking to the internet and expressing, myself included, their just dissatisfaction with Sony. So let's start first and foremost with the PlayStation blog. I got on there and I immediately start seeing Vita comments. So if you read a couple of these, they're just really bad. It pretty much sort of accusing Sony of giving up on the Vita, completely not even trying at all, right? I mean, this comment really says it all. I have to agree with the Vita owners. This is why I didn't buy a Vita. Support a system fully or don't make one. And this really seemed to be the theme of the post on the PlayStation blog. And this is on an article about an E3 roundup, right? This is an article made on the PlayStation blog by the president of Sony. I think it was Sean Layden was his name. So obviously Sony's probably seen these comments. And what really came up later on towards the later comments was they were actually deleting comments from Vita owners that were pretty much bitching out Sony. And in fact, actually I had one of my own comments deleted where I pretty much accused Sony of giving up. I wasn't very polite towards them, and so there's just this huge dissatisfaction. And people are also taking to Twitter. Adam Boyes had to respond to a tweet pretty much accusing them of not showing any games for the Vita. And sort of just being let down. And then the tweets replying to this are just even nasty. They're worse. And I don't like Boy's response here. He says, "I'm sorry you felt this way. We're sorry." And he doesn't really offer any hope in the future for Vita owners. He just sort of says, "I'm sorry. That's it. You know, it's almost resignation. It's like, oh, here's an apology. Are you happy now? That's it. That's the end of it." We talked about 13 games. As I mentioned, people are sick of indies on the Vita. Now Shahid, I can't pronounce the rest of his name. I'm sorry. Someone who advocates a lot more for the Vita than Adam Boyes tweeted that Final Fantasy Type 0 HD was coming to the PS Vita, and it was posted on the PlayStation blog. Now, here's a photo of the actual original blog post. I was going to make a video for this because it's kind of a big announcement, but it actually turned out that the Final Fantasy Type 0 HD remake was not for the Vita. It was actually for the PlayStation 4. And so this sort of adds salt to the wound a day after E3. What makes it worse is I think the biggest demographic on the Vita are JRPG fans. So it's like, oh, hey, we gave you a shitty conference. Here's a game you wanted. Oops. Sorry. Not really happening. And so immediately he's getting these... I saw one response that pretty much said, prove you're not worthless. In other words, rectify the situation. Now, he did sort of go into the fact that they're working on it. And he pointed out on NeoGAF, there were over 900 posts in around half an hour. And I think now, if you go back to the article, they're probably just under 3,000 posts. Now, he did offer some hope here. He's essentially saying, stay tuned, we're still on it. In contrast to Adam Boyes' comment, where it simply said, we're sorry, that's it, end of discussion. He seems to be taking on a more, I'd say, proactive approach than Adam Boyes did. He's sort of saying, hey, we know there's problems, we're working on it. So now really all I want to do is sort of expand on this, sort of suggest to Sony how they could actually save the Vita. I think from this press conference there's really only one way for Sony to save the Vita, and that's software. And I think people are expressing that on PlayStation blog and Twitter, essentially saying, hey, we want big games, we want it now. So the first part of this is really Sony's reaction. I think Sony is not in a position where they can deny the Vita's sort of lack of big games. They are in a position pretty much where they they absolutely have to react to the anger surrounding the Vita right now. They cannot deny it. They have got to appease Vita owners. Simply put, if there's this much rage and direct confrontation for Vita owners right now, imagine what would happen if they went into Gamescom and did not announce anything. It would completely boil over. So I would assume Sony is going to have to react. Now what that reaction needs to be is what I'm going to get into here. Let's just pose a really simple question here. How could Sony save the Vita? I sort of said it earlier, which is they need to make big games, right? Gio Corsi, or Corsi, I can't pronounce his name, sorry, I've never heard his name pronounced. But he essentially, it's called hashtag building the list on Twitter. And what he's doing right now, he's a third-party relations guy. Essentially what he's doing right now is asking people on PlayStation what they want on PlayStation systems. So I think he's already showing an initial reaction from Sony, which is, hey, people are mad. We need to react. We need to change something, right? We cannot really deny it any longer. We can't push the Vita to the side anymore. I think on the surface, Sony is showing that they are reacting to the situation. Now, he's a third-party guy, right? So we're assuming that this is going to be a third-party. Final Fantasy Type 0 was third-party. So I think the reaction is going to come in the form of third-party developers. I think it's going to have to. I think too many of Sony's first-party developers, other than Sucker Punch, are tied up right now making PlayStation 4 games. And there's a rumored Infamous coming to the Vita. Nate Fox sort of let it slip. He's the Sucker Punch director, CEO, whatever you want to call it. He sort of let it slip in an interview that there's an Infamous coming for the Vita. He said a couple times he'd like to see Infamous on the Vita. But I think in the future, this reaction is going to be largely third party. And so what Sony has to do now is go and pay third parties, make deals with them to bring games to the Vita. So I'm going to expound on this by pointing out BioShock Vita. Essentially, Sony and 2K and Ken Levine promised that BioShock would come to the Vita in E3 2011, I think it was. And it never came about. Much to everyone's dismay, I played BioShock Infinite. I can say without a doubt, it was one of the best games I have ever played. It was just mind-blowing. And I don't think... It's a shame it didn't come to the Vita. Or it won't come to the Vita. I don't think it will. And what the problem was is that 2K wanted money. They said, hey, the Vita doesn't have a big install base, so if we're going to do this, we want financial backing. But Sony is notorious for not paying third parties. Microsoft is pretty notorious for paying third parties. I don't understand why Sony won't pay third parties, because the payoff is there. And that, to me, is the strategy going forward for the Vita. So what I would suggest to Sony is simply pay any developer in the West. You need Western sales. You're fine in Japan. Pay any amount of money a big Western developer wants to bring a household franchise name to the Vita. It could be BioShock. It could be a new Borderlands. It could be anything that resonates well in the West. Pay whatever price they want. So, for instance, if 2K wanted Sony to pay, we'll assume $20 million. Okay? So Sony pays them the $20 million. We're going to assume right now the game sells 1 million copies. I don't know the official numbers for BioShock Infinite on the PS3, but I'm going to assume they're much higher than 1 million. Not to mention the fact it was also on many other systems, so chances are it would probably sell more than 1 million. Okay, so we're going to assume right now Sony gets 25% per game. Now, if you've looked at, or watched the E3 press conference last year, Jack Tretton mentioned that in fact 60% of Vita games are bought digitally. So Sony would actually they would actually get more money per game sale than we're assuming from this scenario. So we're going to assume they get 25% of 1 million sales. That would be 40 million total revenue. They get 10 million back immediately. Now what I've sort of hinted at is that BioShock's a big game. People are probably going to buy more Vitas. That might mean more money in Sony's pocket. We're going to assume it doesn't mean more money in pocket. We're going to assume they're breaking even. But if those people buy memory cards, that's a lot more money. That's pure profit for Sony. Okay? If essentially people buy accessories, that's more money for Sony. People might buy PlayStation Plus subscriptions. that's more money for Sony. Not to mention other games, which would mean more money for Sony. And PlayStation Vita right now is notorious for having a high software attachment rate. I think it's roughly 10 games per person. That's huge. So if, we'll say 500,000 people bought Vita just for BioShock Vita, you would undoubtedly get your money back. And that's not assuming people are... So I'm saying essentially, I think people would buy the console, right? Your goal here is to sell the Vita. And to say the 20 million wouldn't be worth it is wrong. I think through the theory of cause and effect, Sony would definitely get their money back from paying third parties to make games for the Vita. And to be honest, it's the easiest thing they could do. If they're not trying to invest large first-party resources into it, third parties are the way to go. So this is really my plan for the Vita going into the future. Pay or subsidize third parties to make games for it. Third parties ultimately sell consoles, right? Look at Grand Theft Auto. Grand Theft Auto 5, highest selling game of all time. Third party. Call of Duty, probably second highest gaming series of all time. Third party, right? Third parties move hardware. First parties help. They sort of help define the console. But third parties are what really sell games and consoles, handhelds. So I think Sony needs to get third parties on board, and that's probably going to take some money. If they pay money, though, as I've argued, it will pay off. This concludes the video. If you like it, give me a thumbs up, comment. If you have your own plan for how to help save the Vita, please comment and subscribe.